And hello, everyone, and welcome back to Conversations Live. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. Glad you all could join us once again. For our radio audience tuning in at WYAD 94.1 FM and WYADonline.com, we're glad that you all can be with us. Also join us online worldwide via our podcast at iHeartRadio and Amazon Music. We're glad you all could be with us as well. We're so excited to welcome Heather Pringle to our broadcast today. Heather's celebrating a fascinating new book that whether you are familiar with the Viking era or not, I think this will really help you to better understand the context of a group that we don't hear a lot about, and that is the women. The book is called The Northwomen, Untold Stories from the Other Half of the Viking World. We're going to talk to Heather not only about what it's been like for her to use her own love of archaeology to be able to share this story, but also what is it that fascinated her that she hopes readers take away as well. Heather, thank you again for spending some time with us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thanks so much for inviting me onto your show. Thank you so much.
Well, the pleasure's definitely all mine. This book was really fascinating to me, and there's a couple points in particular I'm going to get to a little bit later, Heather. But I want to ask you, What has it been like for you, for one, to see the initial response to the book, The Northwomen, and then the interest that people have, as you were able to share in this book, about the women in the Viking era?
Well, I mean, it's been really wonderful, actually. Archaeology sometimes can be a little bit, for some people, a little bit dry, and so one never knows how a book that is based on archaeological findings will be received. However, this book seems to be doing really well, and there seems to be a lot of interest in it, and I think that a lot of that interest is really generated by the fact that this book takes a look at a part of the Viking history that is not really well known, and that is to do with the women. Because for most of us, most people tend to think of the Vikings, they think of these sort of big, brawny, bearded men with broad axes slung over their shoulders and sort of swords clinking at their hips kind of thing, and vicious hand-to-hand combat, that kind of thing. Basically a world steeped in testosterone. But and I was certainly one of those people, I have to confess. I was one of them. But several years ago, I was in Oslo in Norway, and I decided to make a visit to the Viking Ship Museum, as it was then called. And I walked into the museum, and there was this enormous Viking ship, an authentic Viking ship, and it dated to around 834 AD, and it had been towed onto land and then used as a burial chamber for a for somebody very, very important, and then covered over by a huge mound of earth. And this was in a farmer's field, not that far from Oslo, and the neighbors called it a king's mound. And so it was assumed to be the burial place of a king or a Viking lord. So when archaeologists arrived to excavate the site, they started digging, excavating the mound, and they found this incredible ship, and it's all intricately carved. And they soon realized, it was filled with wonderful treasures, tapestries that were hung in great halls, and ceremonial carts, and very elaborate things, clothing, fragments of clothing that were made from silk from Asia, and also human remains. And so the human remains were then analyzed by researchers, and to the surprise of some, and I should say certainly the surprise of many at the time, those human remains belonged to women, two women. They weren't this was not the burial place of a Viking king or a Viking lord. It was the burial place of two Viking women, and two very wealthy and powerful Viking women, because this grave, the Oseberg ship burial, is the most lavish burial of the Viking age, certainly the most lavish burial known to archaeologists today from the Viking age. So it's interesting that this very wealthy burial is belonged to two women.
Yeah, and I think
so
that
at that
is what.
Point,
I'm sorry. Go.
I'm sorry,
go
I was
ahead,
just going to say that sorry about that. Sorry to jump in there, but at that point, I realized that boy, we were missing a big chunk of the picture of the Viking world.
And that's what I think the NORTHWOMEN helps to kind of fill in. I was just going to say, though, Heather, as you were talking, though, that is one of the things that really was interesting to me, because you're right in what you said earlier. I think for a lot of us, myself included, we normally do just focus on, on the men when we think about, Vikings, and don't think about the women. But what your book does is show the good and bad side of that too, and that is the way some women were treated. You talked about, of course, slavery when it comes to the Vikings coming to England, and the horrible things happening there, and how women were taken, in some senses probably as some form of property or personal use, but also the influence of women. I love the fact you're able to share that as well. What was that like for you to see, not only just to unearth, as it were, Heather, the stories about these women, but also to realize the prominence that many of them had?
Well, it was super interesting. I was really kind of dumbfounded at times when I, began kind of delving into, particularly the research concerning, the upper class, high status, wealthier Viking women. Some women were landowners, for example, and were involved in the kind of the management of large estates. And, so the information about, a lot of the information about these women comes from burials that archaeologists have excavated. And some of these burials are marked with smaller mounds, not the size of the mound for the Oseberg women, but smaller mounds. And these mounds indicate that the person buried within was a landowner, a property owner. And so we have women in some of these burials. So women were landowners, and they exerted quite a bit of power, both, economic power, because their farms, generated produce that, that could be used as, in households and as economic, as bartering, in trading and bartering. And these were powerful women. And so, we see quite a bit of evidence for this. And largely this evidence comes from burials, from the burials of wealthy women. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of evidence from the burials of poorer women because they were not buried with a lot of grave goods. So the picture of the lower classes women is a little bit sketchier.
And you also are able to share in this book, Heather, the influence outside of those in the Viking world as well. In the chapter Traders, you talk about especially what happened in Burka, the role, of course, of textile workers and what they were able to do and their impact, and how, as you allude to in that chapter, we're not just talking about some individuals who may have just, been involved in this industry, on the side of what they were doing. Many of them may have been even full-time in their craft. Why was that an important thing, do you think, to not only to discover, but also to share, Heather, when it comes to talking about the influence, not only, of course, that women were having in that time when it came to textile, but also you talked about there, of course, the clothing and the impact of that as well.
Yeah, and it's the clothing. The clothing is very important. I think also what's incredibly important is the sailcloth that women made. Now that sounds very kind of mundane, but just think of it for a moment. The sails on the Viking ships were huge. Some of them, for a large warship, were about the size of 20 king-sized beds pushed together. So if you can visualize that would be the size of one sail on one Viking ship. And in order to produce that sail, to make that sail, everything, all the sailcloth had to be produced by hand. So the sheep had to be plucked by hand, with no clippers, electric clippers. I mean, everything. No industrial mills or anything. Women all produced it all by hand. Anyway, archaeologists have done replication experiments to make sometimes smaller sails and smaller pieces of sailcloth. and then clocked how much time actually it took to make that from scratch. And it turns out that to make one sail for one large Viking warship could have taken, and probably did take, around 10,000 hours. So 10,000 hours of one, of women's labor, because men were not textile producers in the Viking Age. We don't have any good evidence for that. So, just one sail alone for one Viking ship, 10,000 hours. And if you carried a sailcloth enough for a spare, because, if you're heading across the North Atlantic in an open ship, you want to make sure that you had a spare cloth to make another sail should anything happen to the sail on your ship. So, that's 20,000 hours, and that's just for one ship. So, the amount of labor, women's labor that went into just equipping the ships was just enormous. And then women were also involved in doing things such as, making cloth armor for some Viking warriors. Very, very wealthy warriors could afford to buy chainmail. Chainmail, had to all be handmade, and it was just incredibly expensive. So warriors from lower class families needed armor too, but they couldn't afford chain armor. So the women in their families, there is evidence suggesting that women in the families made these kind of padded caftans, padded jackets and made of cloth that the Vikings wore. They were quilted of multiple layers, maybe 18 or 20 layers of cloth, and all quilted together and then tailored to make a jacket. And it sounds like cloth. If you took a sword and slashed someone wearing a jacket, someone would probably get injured. But experiments today have shown that if you take a piece of this quilted cloth and use it as targets for archers, the people running those experiments noted that if the arrows were fired from a considerable distance or at low velocity, they sometimes just bounced off the cloth pieces. I don't think they were as effective as chainmail, but on the other hand, it was better than not having any armor whatsoever. And some researchers have gone so far as to say that they were sort of a precursor of the body armor made of Kevlar today. So a very early precursor, let's say.
It is a fascinating read, Heather, and so glad we have you here to be able to talk about it. Again, everyone, Heather Pringle has been our guest. The book is NORTHWOMEN, Untold Stories from the Other Half of the Viking World, available through our friends at Amazon.com or through your favorite local bookstore. Heather, congratulations to you. How can our audience stay connected with you?
Well, they could check out my website, and that's at heatherpringle.com. And there's more information about the book and about my other writing projects and other books and articles as well.
All right. Well, Heather, congratulations to you, and looking forward to our next chat together.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
More than welcome. More than welcome. We thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Conversations Live. Until next time, I'm your host, Cyrus Webb, saying as always, enjoy your day, enjoy your life, enjoy your world. Thank you all for choosing Conversations Live, and let's go make today amazing. Take care.